this is a very serious conversation I want to have here because this is about Douglas Murray.
You're an anti-semite.
I put a video about Dave Smith dismantling Douglas Murray, which he did, unless you're a Douglas Murray simp. But I've never had more of a backlash in the comments than I have from that video, right? Douglas Murray's army of simps came at me pretty hard. Like,
you're an anti-semite.
It blew me away. Let's talk about Douglas Murray because this guy is an absolute clown. And the idea that he's some intellectual heavyweight or some kind of guy who's like really out there speaking truth is completely insane. And I'm going to show you why. So let's get started. First and foremost, you have to know where Douglas Murray comes from. He is an Oxford guy, which is basically the British equivalent of, Yale or Harvard or any of the elite schools here in the United States.
You're an anti-semite.
So he's obviously from a, high sophisticated crop of, I don't even know what kind of verbal bullshit I could use to describe this, but basically he is a elite, really. I mean, he went to Oxford, you got to have real money or real connections or, something real serious to get into these kind of schools. So
you're an anti-semite.
Let's start there. But then how did Douglas Murray burst onto the scene? So let's look at his Wikipedia real quick here. Let me make sure I got this on. So here we go. July 16th. So he just had a birthday, 1979. He's a year younger than myself. British author and conservative political commentator, cultural critic, and journalist. He founded the Center for Social Cohesion in 2007, which became part of the Henry Jackson Society, where he was associate director. The Center for Social Cohesion was a British think tank. The director of the CSC was writer and commentator Douglas Murray, the author of Neoconservatism, Why We Need It. According to Al Jazeera, the CSC produced reports that covered areas including the rise of Islamist extremism and neo-fascism in the United Kingdom, as represented by the British National Party. So Douglas Murray, his kind of breaking onto the scene here was a book called Neoconservatism, Why We Need It in 2006, after the neoconservatives in the United States had been largely discredited as war criminals and crooks of the highest order. Douglas Murray comes in to make the case for why they're great thinkers, basically a complete apologist for wasteful garbage and actually hurts U.S. interests in the world, and probably British interests too, in the long term. Neoconservatism, Why We Need It, is a defense of the most controversial political philosophy of our era. Douglas Murray takes a fresh look at the movement that replaced the Great Society liberalism, helped Ronald Reagan bring down the wall, that's debatable, and provided the intellectual rationale for the Bush administration's war on terror. So Douglas Murray, since his inception, has been a shill for failed policy. That's who Douglas Murray is. He's a guy who came out of elite schools and institutions as a trained apologist for failed policy. That's who Douglas Murray is, an apologist for failed policy, starting with neoconservatism. Now, when I came to know Douglas Murray was during the Monk debates with Matt Taibbi, the first one he did, before the recent one he did with Mehdi Hasan, where he basically just called Mehdi Hasan an anti-Semite the whole time. In a previous debate, which I'm going to show you, I got receipts for this, the one with Matt Taibbi, he made a great points about how any of the protesters for the trucker thing in Canada were called anti-Semites. But Douglas Murray will flip around and become the Canadian authoritarians he decries when it comes to an issue that he's emotional about, the war in the Middle East, because he is a neocon and an apologist for failed policy. So that's all he does. That's his core belief. That's the place that Douglas Murray operates from completely. So I want to show you, he wrote this book apologizing for neoconservatism, but he's also written other books apologizing for failed policy. And one of his big ones was a book called The War on the West. And it's just about how Islam, you got to be scared of Islam because they're coming to get you. And we have to bomb the shit out of them because of women's rights or whatever you need. And when Douglas Murray wrote this book, liberal pundits like Nathan J. Robinson of Current Affairs here called him a racist. Look at this. Taking white supremacist talking points mainstream. So this is Nathan J. Robinson and Matt McManus of Current Affairs, basically calling Douglas Murray a racist. Popular conservative writer Douglas Murray is open about his ethnic chauvinism, and while he claims that's a fancy way to say racism, and while he claims to offer common sense and reason, his work is riddled with errors and overflows with bigotry.
You're an anti-Semite.
I mean, I don't necessarily disagree with that, but let's see. Let's go a little bit deeper on this. Douglas Murray's The War on the West is the latest entry in the Leftists Are Destroying Our Great Western Culture subgenre of polemical conservative nonfiction, to be placed alongside books like Jonah Goldberg's Suicide of the West and Pat Buchanan's The Death of the West, which made the same argument 4 years ago and 2.1 years ago, respectively. Murray is a huge popular conservative writer. YouTube videos of him routinely receive millions of views. I have to believe that's manufactured, like that's conservative bot views, because there can't be that many dumb people out there. But again, maybe I'm just being way too generous with the intellectual level of the world at large.
You're an anti-Semite.
Let's keep going. His books are bestsellers. His arguments tend to be standard issue right-wing fare. Immigration is destabilizing Europe. Cancel culture is the enemy of reason. And social justice warriors complain too much about bigotry and oppression.
You're an anti-Semite.
That's what Douglas Murray's career is built on. His latest book, Neoconservative, Why We Need It, is a firm defense of the Iraq War, which others consider one of the most horrific foreign policy blunders of the 21st century, completely, which most people who have critical thought processes consider one of the biggest blunders of the 21st century. But while Murray may not say anything particularly original, he is a skilled presenter of right-wing arguments and is disturbingly effective at presenting extreme positions as common sense, opposition to madness. He is also gifted at presenting xenophobic and ethno-chauvinistic views. That's, again, a nice way to say racism, a fancy way.
You're an anti-Semite.
To a tone of powdery aloofness, which makes them appear acceptable. Now, I don't necessarily disagree with what these guys are saying, but they're basically, the point of me showing you this is that they're calling Douglas Murray a racist. This is what he's been called for his entire career, because there's definitely a little bit of evidence that you could do that. I don't think it's valid to call him a racist because he's clearly the product of a think tank. I mean, as we showed you, that's his origin, is Oxford and right-wing think tanks. Murray is not a rigorous thinker. On page 80 of the War of the West, I think it's War on the West. While lamenting the decline in education standards, Murray muses that the only thing modern Western populations are more ignorant about than their own history is the history of other peoples outside the West. Just 4 pages later, Murray responds to woke critics who claim that Western school children are oblivious to the historical legacy of the British Empire and other globe-spanning systems of oppression.
You're an anti-Semite.
Saying that these critics believe that people in the West are uniquely ignorant of their own history and uniquely ignorant of other people's too, yet nothing could be further from the truth. So, again, the point of me showing you that is just to show you that Douglas Murray's critics often call him a racist before I show you the next piece of tape I have here.
You're an anti-Semite.
So here is Murray during the trucker protests, and listen to what he has to say.
Absolutely extraordinary. You really know that the world is in trouble when Canada becomes very interesting. It became interesting in January and February of this year. Why? Because you had protesters in Ottawa. Really interesting. When people come out in large numbers, and you know what the job of reporters is? The job of reporters is to go out and say, why are you on the streets? What brought you here? Why are you here with your kids? Why have you got a bouncy castle in the middle of Ottawa? That's a bit strange. Ask them questions. Just find out the story. But you know what? The government didn't want that in Canada. Your Prime Minister decided in advance that these people were, what did he do? All the modern excommunications. They were Nazis, they were white supremacists, they were anti-Semites.
You're an anti-Semite.
They were probably homophobes, they were misogynists, they were probably transphobes, etc., etc., etc. He did all the things you do in the modern political age if you want to just defenestrate somebody who's awkward to you. And
There you go. Let's listen to that one more time.
they were white supremacists, they were anti-Semites, they were probably homophobes, they were misogynists, they were probably transphobes, etc., etc., etc. He did all the things you do in the modern political age if you want to just defenestrate somebody who's awkward to you.
You're an anti-Semite.
And he brings in the Emergency Powers Act now.
So now let's listen to Murray a couple days ago talking about Israel protesters.
Douglas, tell me why you believe.
Look at how the media paints that too, like the caption under that, Douglas Murray was the star of TV debate. Sky News, definitely not pushing an agenda here on Sky News, are we?
Anti-Zionism is anti-Semitism.
So again, the point of me showing you this is 5 minutes ago, Douglas Murray was being called a racist for his views, which, you know, is debatable. The merits of his views can be debated on that alone. They're ridiculous on their merits. You don't even have to call him a bigot or a racist to kind of show that the things he says are completely discredited. He wrote a book on why neoconservatism, a literal failed policy, is important and great. So anyway, let's keep going with this.
It's obvious that in all of history, anti-Semitism has been a shape-shifting virus. Sometimes people hated the Jews for their race. Sometimes they hated them for their religion. In this era, the only permissible way to hate the Jews is to hate them for having a state.
So a good question, a good follow-up question for this reporter would be, so Douglas, what would you say to Jewish protesters who are against the conflict in Gaza? And he would go, well, of course they're anti-Semites, and that makes total sense because I'm a complete idiot and so is my following.
And as I mentioned in the debate, this absolute obsession with the single Jewish state in the world,
You're a racist. If you have any criticism of this, you're an anti-Semitic racist. So these people, I just don't understand how this guy is lauded as some kind of intellectual thought leader when he's an open hypocrite idiot. I mean, the guy right here, he's just calling people racists. Let's watch this clip again.
Excommunications. They were Nazis, they were white supremacists, they were anti-Semites.
You're an anti-Semite.
Your Prime Minister decided in advance that these people were, what did he do? All the modern excommunications. They were Nazis, they were white supremacists, they were anti-Semites, they were probably homophobes, they were misogynists, they were probably transphobes, etc.
Notice they use all this stuff against Palestine protesters. Oh, if you're a gay for Palestine, you're a hypocrite because they is what you're you're the real anti-trans if you're against, the bombing in Gaza. But let's go back to this.
People who never turned out on the streets when Bashar al-Assad was killing 6 times the number of people who've died in every war involving Israel since 1948 when the Arab armies advanced. If you didn't come out on the streets when Bashar al-Assad killed 6 times that number of people in a decade, but you did turn out.
A lot of those numbers have been widely discredited by people who aren't government mouthpieces and puppets of empire.
Out to attack Israel after October the 7th, you're an anti-Semite. And there are many, many examples of this. I gave it.
Just replace the term anti-Semite with racist, because that's the argument this guy is making. If you have a problem with what he says, you're a racist. And there is no literal difference between Douglas Murray and Justin Trudeau. So if you're a big fan of Douglas Murray, congratulations, you're a fan of Justin Trudeau. He is Justin Trudeau, part 2. So let's listen to this again. Here's Douglas Murray.
They were Nazis, they were white supremacists.
On the Canadian trucker protest and what was done to them.
Prime Minister decided in advance that these people were, what did he do? All the modern excommunications. They were Nazis, they were white supremacists, they were anti-Semites, they were probably homophobes, they were misogynists, they were probably transphobes, etc., etc., etc. He did all the things you do in the modern political age if you want to just defenestrate somebody who's awkward to you.
And here is Douglas
in
Murray
Canada, in the city I was in,
just
Toronto.
that.
If you didn't come out on the streets when Bashar al-Assad killed 6 times that number of people in a decade, but you did turn out to attack Israel after October the 7th, you're an anti-Semite. You're an anti-Semite. You're an anti-Semite. You're an anti-Semite. You're an anti-Semite.
So then he goes into a bunch of overblown and completely made up statistics. A lot of them probably manufactured complete bullshit about how all these people in Canada, Jewish people in Jewish schools are being attacked. And listen, if that's happening, those people deserve to go to jail. They deserve the full, force of the law. It's not cool. But you don't just get to call people that you find awkward racists, Douglas.
You're an anti-Semite.
And, all the people in the comments, suck it.
You're an anti-Semite.
Your king is a whack little troll who literally shills for failed policy and calls people he can't debate racists.
You're an anti-Semite.
Just like they do to him. It's just interesting to see how these conservative thought leaders have become the wokey. All it took was one issue to get them emotional enough to become the woke left that they've been making fun of for the last 4 years.
You're an anti-Semite.
So we'll cut it off there. But Douglas Murray is a fraud, and people that think he's some kind of great thinker are complete tools.
You're an anti-Semite. And
I'm not sorry about saying that. Dave Smith did completely dismantle Douglas Murray because Dave Smith has intellectually consistent views and isn't a shill for neoconservatism and isn't a product of a manufactured robot from, Oxford think tanks like Douglas Murray is.
You're an anti-Semite.